The humid air of a Houston summer hung thick and heavy on the morning of August 8, 1973. It was a day like any other in the quiet, working-class suburb of Pasadena, Texas, until 8:24 a.m., when a frantic call shattered the routine of the local police department. The voice on the line was breathless, young, and desperate. It belonged to a 17-year-old high school dropout named Elmer Wayne Henley. "Y'all better come here right now," he gasped. "I just killed a man." For Pasadena Police Detective David Mullican, the call initially sounded like the start of another tragic but familiar case, a domestic dispute, a robbery gone wrong. It started as any other homicide, he would later recall. But when officers arrived at the small, nondescript bungalow at 2020 Lamar Street, the scene they encountered was merely the first thread of a story that would unravel into the most extensive and grotesque case of serial murder in United States history at that time. Inside, they found Henley standing over the lifeless body of his 33-year-old acquaintance, an electrician named Dean Corll. Henley claimed he had shot Corll 6 times with a .22 caliber pistol in self-defense. He explained that Corll, in a sudden rage, had bound him and 2 friends, 20-year-old Timothy Curley and 15-year-old Rhonda Williams, and threatened to sexually torture and kill them all. The initial investigation into a justifiable homicide quickly pivoted as Henley, described by observers as talkative, insistent, almost eager, began to reveal a far more horrifying secret. He confessed that Corll was not just an angry man who had snapped. He was a sadistic predator who had systematically abducted, tortured, and murdered at least 29 teenage boys over the previous 3 years. And then came the most chilling declaration. Henley knew where the bodies were buried. In a now infamous moment, using the radio telephone in a KPRC TV news car at the scene, he made a call to his mother. The conversation, captured on film, included the haunting admission, "Mama, I killed Dean."
"Mama, I killed Dean."
The entire gruesome saga, a secret kept for 3 years through a potent combination of fear and manipulation, was exposed not by diligent police work, but by a desperate act of self-preservation from one of the perpetrators. It was a violent implosion of a criminal conspiracy that would introduce the world to Dean Corll, the so-called Candyman. Hello guys, I'm Zed, and welcome back to another video. Today, we're breaking down the full story of one of the wildest serial killers in the 60s, a man who killed innocent teenagers just to satisfy his sick needs, a man with no mercy for any human being. His end was just like every victim he killed. He was shot 6 times by his partner. We're breaking down the full story of Dean Corll. Without further ado, let's get into it. The architect of the Houston mass murders was a man who cultivated an image of quiet normalcy, masking a psyche warped by a lifetime of instability and isolation. Dean Arnold Corll was born on Christmas Eve 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. His childhood was defined by turmoil. His parents' marriage was marred by frequent bitter arguments, culminating in a divorce in 1946. They attempted a reconciliation in 1950, moving the family to Pasadena, Texas, but the reunion was short-lived and they divorced again in 1953. His mother, Mary, was described as markedly protective, while his father was known to be strict, a dynamic that fostered a complex and troubled development. From a young age, Corll was a shy, serious child who rarely socialized. This isolation was compounded by a physical ailment. At age 7, he contracted a severe case of rheumatic fever that went undiagnosed for years, eventually leaving him with a heart murmur. As a result, he was excused from all physical education classes, a restriction that further set him apart from other boys and may have fostered a deep-seated resentment and a sense of being different. Following the second divorce, Corll's mother started a small candy company in Vidor, Texas, operating initially out of their garage. Corll and his younger brother, Stanley, were put to work, operating the candy-making machines day and night while still attending school. He became known for giving out free candy, a seemingly harmless gesture that he would later weaponize to gain the trust of children, earning him the nicknames the Candyman and the Pied Piper. He graduated from high school in 1958, a well-behaved but solitary student whose only major interest was playing trombone in the school band. After a brief stint in the US Army, where he reportedly had his first same-sex encounters, he returned to Houston and began working as an electrician. His predatory inclinations soon became overt. At one point, a teenage boy employed at the Corll Candy Company complained to Mary Corll that her son had made sexual advances toward him. In a telling act of enablement, she responded not by confronting her son, but by firing the young employee. This incident likely taught Corll a powerful lesson. He could act on his impulses without consequence, as the authority figures in his life would protect him. Acquaintances noted a severe personality shift after he turned 30 in late 1969. This was not a sudden transformation, but the moment his long-gestating violent fantasies were finally unleashed, enabled by the non-threatening persona he had carefully cultivated for over a decade. Dean Corll did not act alone. His campaign of terror was facilitated by two teenage accomplices whose specific psychological vulnerabilities he identified and masterfully exploited. David Brooks was the key that unlocked Corll's ability to prey on the youth of Houston Heights. He met Corll in 1967 as a 12-year-old sixth grader at Helms Elementary, which was located directly across the street from the Corll Candy Company. Brooks came from a broken home and was a boy in need of a father figure. Corll expertly filled this void, lavishing him with attention, gifts, and free candy, becoming what Brooks would later describe as the first adult male who did not mock his appearance. By 1969, the relationship had turned sexual, with Corll paying Brooks up to $10 for performing sexual acts, establishing a transactional and manipulative dynamic that cemented his control. This was a slow, methodical grooming process. The final stage occurred in November 1970, when Brooks discovered Corll with two unidentified boys strapped down to a bed. To ensure Brooks's silence, Corll promised him a car. In February 1971, Corll delivered, buying Brooks a green 1969 Chevrolet Corvette for his 16th birthday. Shortly after, Corll confessed he had murdered the two boys and made his chilling offer: $200 for every boy Brooks could lure to his apartment. David Brooks accepted, completing his journey from a lonely boy seeking affirmation to the chief procurer for a serial killer. While Brooks was cultivated, Elmer Wayne Henley was ensnared through coercion. Born in 1956, Henley grew up in a volatile home with an abusive, alcoholic father. After his parents divorced, Henley dropped out of high school to take part-time jobs to support his mother and younger siblings. His family's desperate financial situation made him acutely vulnerable. Henley met David Brooks in October 1971, and Brooks soon introduced him to Corll with the initial intention of making Henley another victim. However, Corll saw a different potential in the physically strong teenager. He preyed on Henley's financial desperation with a carefully crafted lie. Corll told Henley he was part of a white slavery ring and offered him $200 for each teenager he could procure to be sold as pool boys in California. Driven by his family's poverty, Henley eventually agreed. After he delivered his first victim, Corll sprung his trap. He changed his story, claiming the trafficking network had murdered the boy and that Henley was now implicated. If he didn't continue to cooperate, Corll threatened he would go to prison. With this single act of blackmail, Henley was trapped. Corll further solidified his control by relentlessly attacking Henley's religious beliefs, eroding his conscience and molding him into a more compliant accomplice. For 3 years, Corll and his accomplices waged a secret war against the youth of Houston. The boys they targeted were often friends and acquaintances, lured to their deaths with promises of parties, drugs, or a simple ride home. The killing spree began in earnest in late 1970. On the evening of December 13th, Brooks lured two 14-year-old boys, James Eugene Glass and Danny Michael Yates, away from a religious rally at the Evangelistic Temple in Houston Heights. At Corll's apartment, they were restrained, raped, and strangled before being buried in the Southwest boat storage shed. This established the core methodology. The violence continued into 1971. On January 30, Brooks and Corll abducted brothers Donald Waldrop and Jerry Waldrop. As they walked home, they were murdered and buried together in a single grave. On March 9th, 15-year-old Randall Lee Harvey was killed with a single gunshot through the eye. A particularly chilling set of murders occurred on May 29th with the abduction of David William Hilligiest and Gregory Malley-Winkle. Hilligiest was a lifelong friend of Elmer Wayne Henley. At this point, Henley was not yet an accomplice, but his deep connection to one of the early victims is a grim foreshadowing of his future role. After Hilligiest's disappearance, Henley actively participated in the search efforts, a horrifying display of deception. The year 1972 marked a significant escalation, largely driven by Henley's introduction as a second accomplice. On March 24, 1972, he helped lure 18-year-old Frank Anthony Aguirre to Corll's home. It was after this abduction that Corll finally revealed the truth. The boys were being murdered. A month later, Corll forced Henley to cross a final, terrible threshold during the murder of 17-year-old Mark Stephen Scott. Corll ordered Henley to strangle the boy. According to Henley, he lacked the physical strength, but Brooks offered a conflicting account, claiming Henley was especially sadistic. Around June 1972, Corll constructed a large plywood torture board, an 8-foot by 3-foot sheet with holes for restraints. This device signified a crucial psychological shift. The torture itself had become the central organizing principle of the crime. On May 21, 1972, Henley and Brooks assisted in the double murder of Billie Jean Balch Jr. and Johnny Ray Delhomme. According to Brooks's confession, Henley personally strangled Balch and then shot Delhomme. Henley and Corll together strangled him to death. The final year was marked by Corll's escalating paranoia. In March, he moved to his final residence in Pasadena. As David Brooks's involvement waned, he married his pregnant fiancée in July. Henley became Corll's primary accomplice. On June 4th, Corll ordered Henley to bring him a boy. Henley lured 15-year-old William Ray Lawrence, who was kept alive for 3 days and subjected to almost continuous torture. This case would become legally pivotal, as it was the single murder for which David Brooks was ultimately tried and convicted. The final victim was 13-year-old James Stanton Dremala. On August 3, 1973, just 5 days before Corll's own death, Brooks shared a pizza with the young boy before leaving him alone with Corll. Dremala was tied to the torture board, tortured and strangled. The intricate web of control finally unraveled on the night of August 7, 1973. Henley decided to throw a party, inviting Timothy Curley and Rhonda Williams to Corll's house. Corll's sadistic obsession was focused exclusively on teenage boys. The unexpected arrival of a female sent him into a violent rage. He took Henley aside and furiously accused him of having ruined everything, then proceeded to ply all three with alcohol and paint fumes until they passed out. They awoke hours later to a nightmare, bound and gagged on the floor. Corll threatened to murder all of them. In a desperate act of negotiation, Henley promised Corll that if he were released, he would actively participate in the torture of his friends, believing his control was absolute. Corll made a fatal mistake. He untied Henley. Corll instructed him to rape Rhonda. At that moment, as he began to cut away her clothes, Williams reportedly looked at him and pleaded, "There's no way you're going to let something happen to me." Henley, who claimed he was taught to always protect women, reached his breaking point. His fear of Corll was finally eclipsed by the immediate horror. In his rage, Corll had made another critical error. He had laid his .22 caliber pistol down within Henley's reach. Henley grabbed the gun. "You've gone far enough, Dean," he shouted. As Corll advanced, Henley opened fire, hitting him in the forehead, shoulder, and back. He was, in that moment, following the very lesson Corll himself had taught him to keep shooting until the target is down. Dean Corll collapsed and died on the floor of his home. The death of Dean Corll triggered a series of confessions that led investigators to the charnel house at the Southwest Boat Storage and other makeshift graveyards. The subsequent investigation and trials exposed not only the depravity of the perpetrators, but also the profound systemic failures of a justice system that had allowed them to operate for so long. Police had repeatedly dismissed the missing boys as runaways, a judgment colored by the fact that many came from working-class homes. The term serial killer had not yet entered the law enforcement lexicon, leaving the system without a paradigm to understand such repetitive, psychologically motivated violence. For the families of the lost boys, the end of the killing spree marked the start of a lifetime of mourning and advocacy. The parents of James Stanton Dremala, James and Elaine, have attended every parole hearing for Elmer Wayne Henley for over 4 decades, a tireless crusade against a legal system that, at the time, could not guarantee a permanent sentence. This prolonged suffering was compounded by institutional errors. In 2011, the families of victims Mark Scott and Stephen Sickman discovered that the medical examiner's office had misidentified their son's remains nearly 40 years earlier, forcing them to grieve anew. One final mystery remains. Despite decades of work by forensic anthropologists, one of Corll's victims remains unidentified. Known as Swimsuit Boy, his remains were among the 17 recovered from the boat shed. He was between 15 and 18, found wearing a distinctive pair of Catalina swim trunks with a C buckle. He is the last of the known lost boys waiting to be returned to his family. The Houston mass murders were a brutal education for a nation, exposing the catastrophic consequences of dismissing reports of missing children and forcing America to confront the reality of the serial killer in its midst.